Hi, I'm Kat, and today I have for you a true crime case, a word in Romanian, and I'll also be doing my makeup at the same time. Today we are carrying on with the James Bulger series, so if you haven't watched part 1 of this case, I highly suggest you watch the first part before you watch the second one, this part, because otherwise it might not make sense to you, as I'm going to jump right in from where we left off. So anyway, before we start, the word in Romanian for today is, well, it would be quite obvious, partea a doua. Partea a doua. Partea a doua. Well done, guys, you just said part 2. Obviously, while in police custody, both Robert and John deny murder. They deny killing James Bulger. During this time, police got even more information. This time, it came from a shop formerly known as Bradford and Bingley Building Society. The manager reported that on 12th of February he saw two boys hanging about by the door, and they had their fingers all over the windows, so naturally detectives took fingerprints of the windows, and not surprisingly they were able to match them immediately to Jon Venables. They could now place Jon Venables in the Strand. Robert Thompson, on the other hand, admitted quite early on in the interview that both of them were in the Strand. They both saw James and his mother. As they were going up the escalators, James and his mom were coming through the doors. Robert said that James was running around the shop. When John told him, "Come here," he then grabbed his hand and walked out the Strand, by the Marks and Spencer's shop by the canal bridge. Now, we need to remember that Robert was street smart. He was quite clever. He'd been skipping school often and would wander about the streets, so he knew the area, the ins and outs, and the spaces around him. Robert pointed out that perhaps John got James to follow behind them, but they then lost James somewhere, which I find very, very odd considering the amount of details that he's giving, yet the most important thing, he doesn't really know where they presumably lost James. It's just not really adding up, you know. Even though Robert tried really hard not to incriminate himself while he was speaking to the interrogators, he failed when he gave a detailed account of what James Bulger had been wearing on the day he was killed. Jon Venables is being interviewed 3 miles away from Robert at Lower Lane Police Station, and he carries on saying that he wasn't at the Strand, but by this point police already know from Robert that this is just not true, so they confront John about it, telling him what Robert had said. Eventually, Jon Venables actually sleeps, and this is a major sleep, and it just goes to show that no matter how hard these kids try to hide the fact that they killed James, and they try to manipulate the police into believing them, lying about being at the shopping center, in the end, you know, they are still kids, and you know how kids are like. Once you grill them enough, they get caught in the lie. After John says that the boys didn't do anything, he sleeps, saying that it was Robert's idea to kill James. And I really can't believe that I'm saying this, considering his age. He was only 10 years old. But Robert Thompson was very calculated during the police interviews. Whenever there was an awkward situation during the interview, he would cry. He was given a Mars bar and a Coke, but when he cried, there were just no tears. He was trying to manipulate the police officer interrogating him. He actually thought that he was going home. He even said at one point in the interview room that if he wanted to kill a baby, he would have killed his own, referring to his younger stepbrother. And there was a pattern emerging there, you know, of desperate lying, trying to talk about anything else apart from this, apart from the murder of James. He believed that he was actually working the police. Jon Venables in the interview was quite scared of actually upsetting his mother. Susan Venables started, you know, shouting at him, and at one point the police had to tell her to stop doing that, as she won't be helping him open up. The police took her aside and told her she should let John know that they love him no matter what happened and they support him, but he needs to tell the truth. So Susan listens to the officers and tells John to just tell the truth. She changes her tone, and this made all the difference to John. He confessed to killing James Bulger. John soon said, "I did kill him. What about his mom? Will you tell her I'm sorry?" According to him, together with Robert and James, they went outside to the canal. John and Robert just wanted to throw James into the water. Robert was persuading James to kneel down and look at the water in an attempt to distract him and then push him, but James didn't do it. And when they couldn't get James down, Robert got really angry with him, so he picked him up and threw him on the ground. That's how James got a bump on his head. The boys then walked James past Queen's Drive, past Christ Church, and took him on the reservoir. They walked him to the reservoir so that they can get him to Walton village, and they walked along the train track. They get to the railway track and they start throwing bricks at James, in his face, on his head, on his body. Jon Venables tried really hard to remove himself from all of the violent actions, blaming Robert Thompson, even saying that he only hit James a few times and it was only because Robert asked him to. But he said that he didn't do it really hard. And when Robert asked him to throw bricks at James, he didn't hit James. Instead, he threw the bricks next to him. Now, as you can imagine, by this point in their interviews, they both start blaming each other. Robert said it was John who threw a brick in James's face. I mean, the hell that poor baby went through is just unbelievable. Each time that James was hit and kicked after falling on the ground, he would get up and he kept getting back up. John said that Robert told James to just stay down because he probably wanted him dead. Both boys splashed stolen blue paint into James's eyes. They then bludgeoned him with bricks and stones, kicked his battered body, and shoved batteries into his mouth. Finally, they hit James over the head with a 22-pound iron bar. That blow alone caused 10 skull fractures. The stones being thrown hit James in the head. The iron bar knocked James out onto the railway track. That was the last time that James Bulger would be knocked on the ground. He never got back up. James just lost his life. By the time James was dead, he had sustained 42 brutal injuries in total. The baby's heartbreaking final words were, "I want my mom." After murdering James, Robert and John placed his body on the railway track in an attempt to make his death look accidental. Even though a train came and severed James's body in two, it was obvious that his demise was no accident. His body would be found 2 days later. Jon Venables blamed Robert Thompson for everything, and that was the story, and it never changed. At this point, police had everything they needed. They had confessions, they had evidence, and 10-year-old John and 10-year-old Robert murdered James Bulger on 12th of February 1993. After questioning Robert Thompson and Jon Venables, Detective Phil Roberts said, quote, "As far as I'm concerned, that day I stared evil in the face. They were a match made in hell, a freak of nature. They went out that day to kill. I truly believe that. And if they hadn't been caught, I fear they would have struck again." End of quote. We will never know exactly what happened when James was killed, but one thing we do know is that 2-year-old James was brutally murdered by 2 monster children. On 20th of February 1993, John and Robert are charged with James's murder. The youngest children to face murder charges in the UK for over 100 years.
This interview is being tape recorded. I'm Detective Sergeant Roberts. Now, what's your full name?
Robert Thompson.
What do they call you? Robert or Bobby?
Walton.
I think Bobby's a more friendly name. Do you agree?
Yeah.
I just want to know a little bit about you now, okay? What's your hobby then?
Skipping school.
Skipping school, is that right?
That's not a hobby, that's a profession, Bobby, when you do it as well as you.
Bobby, I came round to your house this morning, didn't I?
Yeah.
What did I say to you?
Listening.
Correct. What for?
James.
James, what about James?
That you said on suspicion of murdering him.
Well, very well remembered. Did you ever see him in the Strand? You shook your head again.
Yeah.
Bobby, was that on the day that we're talking about? Was that on this Friday? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were going up the escalators. They were going through the doors that there's loads of.
Who was he with?
No.
Little James.
His mum.
With his mum. He was just running around, was he, James?
Yeah.
Will you tell me exactly what? Slowly, right?
He was just said, come here. And then he grabbed his hands and walked up to Strand.
How did he come up to John?
How did he come up to John?
James.
No, he was walking around the Strand.
Who was? James?
The baby.
Was he?
I told him to take him back.
You did what?
Told him to take him back.
You told him to take it back?
Alright, Bobby. No, you're not getting all the blame. You're just asking your son. You're trying to find
You
out.
feel like the blame.
Wait a minute, Bobby. You see, little James is following me up on stage. Right? But on another picture, John, it appears as if John had hold of his hand.
Yeah, well, why are you questioning me and John as well?
John saying to us that he wasn't down at the Strand.
But we were.
I know you were at the Strand, but why should he lie to us by saying that he wasn't in the Strand? He's scared of saying that he was down in the Strand because something happened, didn't it?
Not the baby got took.
Yeah.
Not by me.
We certainly admitted throwing stones and things like that.
But he's blaming you for a lot of things.
Yeah, but why is it
understand?
blaming me?
Well, I want to know the truth, right? The whole truth. There's other things going on, isn't there? I know the truth. I believe I know the truth.
I was there.
That's
You
right.
waved.
Correct, but I know there's a lot of things that have gone on.
Yeah, well, do you know you that killed him? It wasn't. I never even killed him. I'm gonna end up getting all the blame because I've got blood on me.
We're asking you, son, and we want you to tell us the truth, that's all. Not give the blame to you or anything else. But it's only the truth that we're
Yeah, but
concerned about.
Johnny threw a brick in his face.
Just go through slowly, right? What John did with what, right? You said he got hit with a brick first, did he? Then, what did he do?
Another brick.
He threw another brick.
2055.
Will I be able to go home tonight?
We don't know yet, we don't know yet. And I want you to tell
I
me,
don't need to answer any more questions, do I?
come on now, Bobby.
Yeah, well, I do want to kill him when I've got a baby of my own.
I'm trying
If I
to...
wanted to kill a baby, I'd kill my own, wouldn't I?
Was he able to talk?
No?
James,
Yeah?
what did he say to you?
He said that the two of you were in the Strand and that you saw the little boy.
We never. Yeah, we was, but we never saw any kids there. We never got any kids.
So you were in Bootle New Strand.
Was you in Bootle Strand?
We never got a kid, Mum. We never got a
Mrs.
kid.
Venables, would you? I must ask you not to get angry with it.
I never got the boy. I never killed him, Mum.
And you said that you took him by the hand and led him out of the Strand shop.
We never. He's a liar.
Calm down. My gosh.
Alright, come on.
The God's honest truth.
God's honest truth, I'm telling you that we never. He was too scared. He was probably too scared.
A short while ago, as is detailed on your custody record out there, you had a conversation with your mum and you then requested that myself come into the room. Is that right? Yeah. And what was it you told us?
that I killed James. So we walked up to him and we were walking around with him and I took his hand.
And whose idea was it to walk towards him?
Mine.
Was it? What did
Then
you
it was Robert's idea to kill him. And we went outside to take him out.
What for?
Don't know, he said let's throw him in the water. He was persuading, he said kneel down and let's look at the water and all that, but he wouldn't. Because when we wouldn't get him down, Robert picked him up and threw him on the floor and that's where he got his bump on his head.
Why were you taking him to Walton Village?
Don't know, we didn't know what to do.
You walk along where?
To the train track. He took him on the rail track and started throwing bricks at him. Throwing bricks, because Robert said pick a brick up and throw it, I just threw it on the floor.
What was Robert saying while he was doing all this?
We seemed to stay down, stupid digging him.
Why did he want him to stay down?
Don't know. Wanted him dead, probably.
Where did the stones in the bar hit him?
In the head.
And you say the bar knocked him out?
Yeah. Onto the railway track.
And what happened then?
No, he was just lying there. Just finished now because I can't speak anymore.
10 days after the murder, on 22nd of February 1993, the two boys appear at South Sefton Magistrates Court in Bootle to face their charges, and they both plead not guilty. A crowd of 300 people gather outside, and as the vans leave, a riot breaks out. This time the vans are decoys, but it raises questions. What would have happened if the crowd had got hold of one of the defendants? The authorities, having underestimated the public's anger, they actually relocate the trial to Preston. The first time that the boys set eyes on each other after they were arrested was in Preston Crown Court on 1st of November 1993, where they stood trial. They occasionally looked at each other, but when the court was played, John's tape descriptions of how they had truanted, they simultaneously smiled. Every day the public gallery was packed with students, pensioners, mothers, teenagers, all drawn to the courtroom. The mayor of Preston accused them of being sick people, but still they came queuing up for tickets 2 hours before the proceedings began. The Swedes, French, Germans, Canadians and Americans had all come to gaze at Liverpool's child killers. The American fed 1.5 minutes of the James Bulger story into a 22-minute bulletin of national and international news. America is the land of shopping malls. This story has no borders, NBC correspondent Dennis Murphy said. A newspaper man from Detroit said it was because Liverpool is the Beatles and love, love, love. Heck, we don't even have murderers that young in New York. At Radio City in Liverpool, the calls were coming through from Australia, New Zealand and Canada. A newsroom reporter who was not working on the case refused transatlantic interview demands, saying that it was not enough that he had a Liverpool accent. Reporters from around the world ended up in the streets of Walton getting interviews of any 10-year-old boys hanging around in the streets. After a while, the 10-year-olds began to charge a tenner an interview. I couldn't be arsed talking about them, said one. They were just your average scruff, like the rest of us. Inside the court sat the two boys, so little that you could barely see them at the desk. After a while, they kind of became used to it. They looked, moved, fidgeted, scratched, cried, even sucked their thumbs, just like any 11-year-olds. Even though both boys killed James, Detective Phil Roberts believed that Robert Thompson was in charge. And he wasn't the only one believing that. During the murder trial in November 1993, Robert was depicted as the leader and John the follower. This was largely due to the fact that John appeared more emotional, while Robert often appeared chillingly unfazed. Meanwhile, court-appointed psychiatrists said that both Robert Thompson and Jon Venables knew the difference between right and wrong. They also said that neither boy was a sociopath. However, the psychiatrists were not able to find a motive for this horrific crime. To this day, the motive still remains unclear. A special platform is built to allow the defendants to see above the railings. Denise and Ralph Bulger announced they are expecting another baby, but Denise refuses to come to court. She's vehement, she wants be in the same vicinity as James's killers. To this day, there are still certain details of the case that she is unaware of. Crucially, the boys have now reached the age of 11 and they are old enough to be convicted of murder. However, the jury needs to believe that both boys understand the seriousness of their crimes. To hide the identity of both boys, they are referred to during the trial as Child A and Child B. An injunction prevents the press from releasing any details about them. It emerges that on February the 12th, 1993, at around 12:30 p.m., the boys had tried to abduct another little boy from the same shopping precinct. The mother spotted her son and daughter playing with the two boys. While paying for her shopping, she realized that her son was missing. As she ran outside, she saw the same two boys beckoning her son to follow them. Screaming his name, her son returned. During the trial, she remembers overhearing Thompson and Venables say, "We'll take one of those." Sorry guys, I forgot to put my cat ears on. Jon Venables mentioned in his police interview that it was their intention to find the child and throw them into the path of an oncoming bus or taxi in the road outside the shopping center. They wanted the death to look like an accident. This is just a horrifying revelation and a triumph for the prosecution. During the abduction of James Bulger, the pair took him on a 2.5-mile walk in the city. It would take just over 1 hour and 15 minutes to complete. 38 witnesses are called to the stand to reveal what they saw at the various stages of James's final journey. Of course, that some of these witnesses, as I mentioned in part 1, on the day they decided to do absolutely nothing to help James. The prosecution wants to make it clear to the jury that they don't need to rely on Thompson and Venables' version of events. One witness, Malcolm Walton, says he'd seen a child matching James's description near the Leeds and Liverpool Canal that looked to be in a distressed state. Another, Irene Hitman, who was taking her dog for a walk close to her home in Breeze Hill, also saw the same boy at about 4:40 p.m. She said that the boy looked to be frightened with large lumps on his head. She told Robert Thompson and Jon Venables to take the boy home, but that wasn't their intention. Many of the witnesses noticed that the boy was distressed, but all seemed to have assumed that, he was in the care of an older brother or brothers. Some witnesses said that James was crying and he was extremely distressed. Some said that he was laughing. Several noticed injuries to his head, a mark on his forehead and a bump on the right side, another bump on the top of the head, a graze on the face, a red mark on the cheek. Many said that the little boy was held by the two older boys, one on each side, by his arms or his hands. One said they were dragging him and claimed that one of the boys kicked him in the ribs, not a full-blooded kick, but one of persuasion, and yet another said that the two boys swung the child up as if in rough play. At one point, a woman, she saw a boy take hold of the little boy by the shoulders and shake him briskly. One woman who asked if the older boys knew the toddler was told they had just found him and were taking him to a police station. But later, approached by a school friend, one defendant said that the little boy was the other's brother. There were further sightings of James, Robert and John near the railway line just about 2 hours after James's abduction. A man who saw them in an entry to a railway bridge heard one of the older boys say, "I'm fed up having my little brother. He's always the same. I'm not bringing him again." Witness H, a 15-year-old girl, said that at 5:20 p.m. on 12th of February, she saw a toddler with two older boys. They were yards from Walton Lane police station at the foot of the railway embankment. She watched them for only 10 seconds before she walked on. The child was being pushed towards the road. He was laughing, H said. One of the older boys was climbing toward the embankment, the other apparently following with the infant in his arms. It seems that witness H was the last person to see James alive. Allegedly, the boys also threw James over a bridge just to see how he would land and the noise he would make when he would hit rocks. The witnesses all blamed themselves for not interfering, and quite honestly, I blame them as well. I don't blame the 15-year-old girl, but I blame all the adults. I'm not going to, sugarcoat something that shouldn't be sugarcoated. For what reason? Just not to offend someone? Now comes the most horrific part of James Bulger murder, the autopsy report. So get ready. James Bulger's killers inflicted 42 injuries on the 2-year-old baby. He had multiple fractures to the skull and the right side was shattered. Dr. Alan Williams counted 22 bruises, splits and grazes on James's face and head and 20 more wounds on his body. Dr. Williams said that post-mortem examinations revealed that James had been struck by at least 30 blows and he had experienced a short period of survival after the attack. It may only have been minutes, Dr. Williams said on the 7th day of the trial. James was dead before a train severed his body. Dr. Williams speculated on how James suffered so many injuries, so many that none could be isolated as the fatal blow. The deep bruising, the cut on his forehead down to the skull and the damage to the back of the head, together with many other injuries, suggested bricks and an iron bar had been used, Dr. Williams said. The court had admitted as exhibits a catalogue of debris found around the body, a box of 27 bricks, a blood-stained stone found near a child's scarf, his underpants and an iron bar. Dr. Williams spent 33 minutes describing the external injuries suffered by James. Many to his legs had been inflicted when he was naked. The prosecution claimed that the killers stripped him from the waist. It also claimed a grotesque indecency was inflicted on James. The foreskin of his penis was pulled back. Many of the injuries covered an area of less than 1 square inch, but others were massive. Dr. Williams traced the lines of skull fractures from the jaw over the forehead across virtually all of the skull. Brain damage was extensive, including a hemorrhage at the center. One other implement was responsible for James's suffering. Injury number 13 was bruising to the area around the right cheek and ear. It was a severe blow, which Dr. Williams said left a pattern, a grooved mark. It was probably caused by stamping or kicking. The court was also told that among the mourners laying flowers at the scene of James Bulger's murder was one of his alleged killers. Robert Thompson joined a neighbor who went to the railway embankment 3 days after the discovery of James's body. I laid my flowers and he walked away looking at the other flowers, Brenda Jeremy, 47, said in a statement read to the jury. The forensic evidence submitted to the jury is vital. Graham Jackson, a Home Office forensic scientist, matched blood samples from James to the blood found on Child B's shoe, who we now know to be Jon Venables. There was a 1 in a billion chance of it being an error. Philip Rydiard, another forensic scientist, was able to match the pattern of bruising on James's right cheek with features of the upper part of a shoe worn by Child A, which is now known to be Robert Thompson. The shoes were removed without Robert untying the laces, so the police was able to take imprints of the laces and the rings. They were black brogues that had distinctive stitching and an unusual arrangement of lacing rings. Light blue paint marks had been discovered on James's anorak, hair, shoes and underpants. The same light blue paint marks were also found on Robert and John's clothing, including their jackets, trousers and shoes. Andy Mooley, a forensic scientist, pointed out to the jury that a paint mark on John's sleeve might well have been James's small handprint. Despite their strong evidence, the police are concerned that the jury will only return a verdict of manslaughter. The fact that the jury needs to be sure the boys know the severity of their crimes is troubling the police, especially Detective Superintendent Albert Kirby. After hearing 3 weeks of evidence, the jury are asked to deliver their verdict. On 24th of November 1993, taking just 6 hours, the jury finds both Robert Thompson and Jon Venables guilty of murder. Mr. Justice Morland sentences them both to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. On November 24th, 1993, Robert Thompson and Jon Venables were found guilty of the abduction and murder of James Bulger, making them the youngest convicted killers in modern British history. But you'd think, considering the seriousness of the crime, that they would spend their lives in prison, right? I mean, that's what you'd expect. But you are so wrong. They were indefinitely sentenced to detention at Her Majesty's pleasure. Her Majesty's pleasure terms is used to describe detention in prison for an indefinite length of time. A judge may rule that a person be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure for serious offenses or based on a successful insanity defense. This is sometimes used where there is a great risk of reoffending. However, it's most often used for juvenile offenders, usually as a substitute for life sentencing, which might be much longer for younger offenders. For example, Section 90 of the United Kingdom's Powers of Criminal Courts Sentencing Act 2000, which only extends to England and Wales, states, where a person convicted of murder or any other offence, the sentence for which is fixed by law as life imprisonment appears to the court to have been aged under 18 at the time of the offence was committed, the court shall, notwithstanding anything in this or any other act, sentence him to be detained during Her Majesty's pleasure. Prisoners held at Her Majesty's pleasure are periodically reviewed to determine whether their sentence can be deemed complete. Although this power traditionally rested with a monarch, such reviews are now made by others. The Secretary of State for Justice in England and Wales, for instance. Minimum terms are also set before which the prisoner cannot be released. In England and Wales, these were originally set by the Home Secretary, but since 30th of November 2000 have been set by the trial judge. Prisoner sentences are typically deemed to be complete when the reviewing body is satisfied that there has been a significant change in the offender's attitude and behavior. So, both boys were ordered to be imprisoned until review when they turned 18, so they actually got 8 years. Shortly after the trial, and after the judge recommended a minimum sentence of 8 years, Lord Taylor of Gosforth, the Lord Chief Justice, recommended that the two boys should serve a minimum of 10 years, which would have made them eligible for release in February 2003 at the age of 20. The editors of The Sun handed a petition bearing nearly 280,000 signatures to Michael Howard, the then Home Secretary, in a bid to increase the time spent by both boys in custody. This campaign was successful, and Howard announced in July 1994 that the boys would be kept in custody for a minimum of 15 years, meaning that they would not be considered for release until February 2008, by which time they would be 25 years old. Lord Donaldson criticized Howard's intervention, describing the increased tariff as institutionalized vengeance by a politician playing to the gallery. So the increased minimum term was overturned in 1997 by the House of Lords that ruled it unlawful for the Home Secretary to decide on minimum sentences for young offenders. The High Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights have since ruled that although the Parliament may set minimum and maximum terms for individual categories of crime, it is the responsibility of the trial judge, with the benefit of all the evidence and argument from both prosecution and defense counsel, to determine the minimum term in individual criminal cases. Tony Blair, then Shadow Home Secretary, gave a speech in Wellingborough during which he said, quote, "We hear of crimes so horrific they provoke anger and disbelief in equal proportions. These are the ugly manifestations of a society that is becoming unworthy of that name." End quote. Prime Minister John Major said that society needs to condemn a little more and understand a little less. The trial judge, Mr. Justice Morland, stated that exposure to violent videos might have encouraged the actions of Thompson and Venables. This was disputed by David McLean, the Minister of State at the Home Office at the time, who said that police had found no evidence linking the case with video nasties. Some British tabloid newspapers claimed that the attack on James Bulger was inspired by the film Child's Play 3 and campaigned for the rules on video nasties to be tightened. During the police investigation, it emerged that Child's Play 3 was one of the films that Venables' father had rented in the months prior to the killing, but it was not established that Venables had ever watched it. One scene in the film shows the malevolent doll Chucky being splashed with blue paint during a paintball game. A Merseyside detective said, quote, "We went through something like 200 titles rented by the Venables family. There were some you or I wouldn't want to see, but nothing, no scene or plot or dialogue where you could put your finger on the freeze button and say that influenced a boy to go out and commit murder." Inspector Ray Simpson of Merseyside Police commented, "If you are going to link this murder to a film, you might as well link it to the Railway Children." The Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994 clarified the rules on the availability of certain types of video material to children. After the trial, Robert Thompson was held at the Barton Moss Secure Care Centre in Manchester. John Venables was detained in Vardy House, a small 8-bedded unit at Red Bank Secure Unit in St. Helens on Merseyside. These locations were not publicly known until after the boys' release. Details of the boys' lives were recorded twice daily on running sheets and signed by the member of staff who had written them. The records were stored at the units and copied to officials in Whitehall. The boys were taught to conceal their real names and the crime they had committed, which resulted in their being in the units. John Venables' parents regularly visited their son at Red Bank, just as Robert Thompson's mother did every 3 days at Barton Moss. Despite initial problems, John Venables was said to have eventually made good progress at Red Bank, resulting in him being kept there for the full 8 years, despite the facility being a short stay only remand unit. Both boys were reported to suffer post-traumatic stress disorder, and John Venables in particular told of experiencing nightmares and flashbacks of the murder. This is really just astounding to me, really. I honestly, like I said in the first part of this series, I have no sympathy whatsoever. In 1999, lawyers for Robert Thompson and John Venables appealed to the European Court of Human Rights that the boys' trial had not been impartial since they were too young to follow proceedings and understand an adult court. The European Court dismissed their claim that the trial was inhumane and degrading treatment, but upheld their claim they were denied a fair trial by the nature of the court proceedings. The European Court also held that Howard's intervention had led to a highly charged atmosphere, which resulted in an unfair judgment. On 15th of March 1999, the court in Strasbourg ruled by 14 votes to 5 that there had been a violation of Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights regarding the fairness of the trial of Thompson and Venables, stating, quote, The public trial process in an adult court must be regarded in the case of an 11-year-old child as a severely intimidating procedure." End of quote. In September 1999, James Bulger's parents appealed to the European Court of Human Rights but failed to persuade the court that a victim of a crime has the right to be involved in determining the sentence of the perpetrator. The European Court case led to the new Lord Chief Justice, Lord Woolf, reviewing the minimum sentence. So in October 2000, he recommended the tariff be reduced from 10 to 8 years, adding that Her Majesty's Young Offender Institution was a corrosive atmosphere for the juveniles. In June 2001, after a 6-month review, the parole board ruled the boys were no longer a threat to public safety and could be released as their minimum tariff had expired in February of that year. The Home Secretary, David Blunkett, approved the decision and they were released a few weeks later on lifelong license after serving 8 years. It was reported that both men were given new identities and moved to secret locations under a witness protection style program. This was supported by the fabrication of passports, national insurance numbers, qualification certificates and medical records. Blunkett added his own conditions to their license and insisted on being sent daily updates on the men's actions. The terms of their release included the following: they were not allowed to contact each other or James Bulger's family, they were prohibited from visiting the Merseyside region, curfews may be imposed on them, and they must report to probation officers. If they breached the rules or were deemed a risk to the public, they could be returned to prison. An injunction was imposed on the media after the trial, preventing the publication of details about Robert Thompson and Jon Venables. The worldwide injunction was kept in force following their release on parole, so their new identities and locations could not be published. In 2001, Blunkett stated, "The injunction was granted because there was a real and strong possibility that their lives would be at risk if their identities became known." Hey Bobs, I really don't understand why we need to spend so much money on rehabilitating murderers, protecting their identities, creating new identities, like a witness protection style program. It's like you reward them by making sure no one can recognize them or know who they are now. I don't know, I just don't get it. It's a waste of money. In the moments after the trial and following the birth of their second son, the marriage of James Bulger's parents, Ralph and Denise, broke down. They divorced in 1995. Oh my god, mi s-a făcut dință și nu stă! Oh.
Ce ți s-a făcut?
Nu stă!
Nu stă.
Nu, și mă faci pe buze. Da, thank you. Denise married Stuart Fergus, with whom she had 2 sons. Ralph also remarried and has 3 daughters by his second wife. The Observer revealed that both Venables and Thompson had passed A-levels during their sentences. The paper also stated that James Bulger's family's lawyers had consulted psychiatric experts in order to present the parole panel with a report which suggested that Thompson is an undiagnosed psychopath, citing his lack of remorse during his trial and arrest. The report was ultimately dismissed. However, his lack of remorse at the time, in stark contrast to Venables, led to considerable scrutiny from the parole panel. Upon release, both Thompson and Venables had lost all trace of their Scouse accent. In a psychiatric report prepared in 2000 before Venables' release, he was described as posing a trivial risk to the public and unlikely to reoffend. The chances of his successful rehabilitation were described as very high. The Manchester Evening News published details that suggested the names of the secure institutions in which the pair were housed, in breach of the injunction against publicity that had been renewed early in 2001. In December of that year, the paper was fined £30,000 for contempt of court and ordered to pay costs of £120,000. no significant publication or vigilante action against Thompson or Venables has occurred. Despite this, James Bulger's mother Denise told how in 2004 she received a tip-off from an anonymous source that helped her locate Robert Thompson. On seeing him, she was paralyzed with hatred and was unable to confront him. In April 2007, documents released under the Freedom of Information Act 2000 confirmed that the Home Office had spent £13,000 on an injunction to prevent a foreign magazine from revealing the new identities of Thompson and Venables. On 14th of March 2008, an appeal to set up a Red Balloon Learner Centre in Merseyside in memory of James Bulger was launched by Denise Fergus, his mother, and Esther Ranson. A memorial garden in James Bulger's memory was created in Sacred Heart Primary School in his hometown of Kirkby, the school he would have been expected to attend had he not been murdered. In March 2010, a call was made by England's Children's Commissioner Maggie Atkinson to raise the age of criminal responsibility from 10 to 12. She said that the killers of James Bulger should have undergone programs to help turn their lives around rather than being prosecuted. The Ministry of Justice rejected the call, saying that children over the age of 10 knew the difference between bad behavior and serious wrongdoing. In April 2010, a 19-year-old man from the Isle of Man was given a 3-month suspended prison sentence for falsely claiming in a Facebook message that one of his former colleagues was Thompson. In passing sentence, Deputy High Bailiff Alistair Montgomery said that the teenager had put that person at significant risk of serious harm and in a perilous position by making the allegation. In March 2012, a 26-year-old man from Chorley, Lancashire was arrested after allegedly setting up a Facebook group with the title "What Happened to Jamie Bulger Was Effing Hilarious." The man's computer was seized for further investigations. I don't know what the hell is wrong with people. Seriously, why would you even do something like that? I also had someone on Twitter sending me a message saying that they are James Bulger, which is completely insane. On 25th of February 2013, the Attorney General's office announced that it was instituting contempt of court proceedings against several people who had allegedly published photographs online showing Thompson or Venables as adults. A spokesman said, quote, "There are many different images circulating online claiming to be of Venables or Thompson. Potentially innocent individuals may be wrongly identified as being one of the two men and placed in danger. The order and its enforcement is therefore intended to protect not only Venables and Thompson, but also those members of the public who have been incorrectly identified as being one of the two men." On 26th of April, 2 men received suspended jail sentences of 9 months after admitting to contempt of court by publishing photos that they claimed to be of Venables and Thompson on Facebook and Twitter. The posts were seen by 24,000 people. According to BBC legal correspondent Clive Corman, the purpose of the prosecution was to ensure that the public was aware that internet users were also subject to the law of contempt. On 27th of November 2013, a man from Liverpool received a 14-month suspended prison sentence for posting images on Twitter claiming to show Venables. On 14th of July 2016, a woman from Margate in Kent was jailed for 3 years after sending Twitter messages to James Bulger's mother in which she posed as one of his killers and as James Bulger's ghost. The sentence was reduced to 2.5 years on appeal. On 25th of October, a man was jailed for 26 weeks for stalking Denise Fergus. He had previously received a police warning for stalking her in 2008. On 31st of January 2019, a man and a woman pleaded guilty to 8 contempt of court offences at the High Court after they admitted to posting photos on social media that they claimed identified Venables. Both received suspended prison sentences. On 13th of March 2019, actress Tina Malone was given an 8-month suspended prison sentence for posting Venables' identity on Facebook. In January 2020, a 53-year-old woman from Ammanford in South Wales received a prison sentence of 8 months suspended for 15 months. In November 2017, she had published an alleged photograph of Venables on Facebook with the advice, share this as much as possible. Lord Justice Nigel Davis said that the offence was close to the line for an immediate prison sentence, but suspended the sentence after observing an early admission of guilt and remorse by the woman. Shortly before his 2001 release, when aged 17, Jon Venables was alleged to have had sex with a woman who worked at the Red Bank secure unit where he was held. In April 2011, in the aftermath of his 2010 imprisonment, these allegations were outlined in a Sunday Times Magazine article written by David James Smith, who had been following the Bulger case since 1993 trial, and again later in a BBC documentary titled Jon Venables, What Went Wrong. The female staff member was suspended for sexual misconduct. She never returned to work at Red Bank. A spokesman for St. Helens Borough Council denied that the incident had been covered up, saying, all allegations were thoroughly investigated by an independent team on the orders of the Home Office and chaired by Arthur de Frischling, a retired prison governor. Jon Venables began living independently in March 2002. Sometime after, he began a relationship with a woman who had a 5-year-old child. It is not known whether Jon had already begun downloading child abuse images at the time of dating the woman, although he denies having ever met the child. In 2005, when he was 23 years old, his probation officer met another girlfriend of his who was aged 17. After a number of young girlfriends, it was presumed that Jon Venables was having a delayed adolescence. That's a great term for justification. After a period of apparently reduced supervision, Jon Venables began excessively drinking, taking drugs, and downloading child abuse images, as well as visiting Merseyside, which was a breach of his license. In 2008, a new probation officer said that he spent a great deal of leisure time playing video games and on the internet. In September that year, he was arrested on suspicion of a fray following a fight outside the nightclub. He claimed he was acting in self-defense, and the charges were later dropped after he agreed to go on an alcohol awareness course. 3 months later, he was found to be in possession of cocaine. He was subjected to a curfew. On 2 occasions, he revealed his true identity to a friend. On 2nd of March 2010, the Ministry of Justice revealed that Jon Venables had been returned to prison for an unspecified violation of the terms of his license of release. The Justice Secretary Jack Straw stated that he had been returned to prison because of extremely serious allegations and stated that he was unable to give further details of the reasons for Jon Venables' return to custody because it was not in the public interest to do so. On 7th of March, media reports said that he had been accused of child pornography offences. In a statement to the House of Commons on 8th of March 2010, the Justice Secretary Straw reiterated that it was not in the interest of justice to reveal the reason why Venables had been returned to custody. Baroness Butler Sloss, the judge who made the decision to grant Venables anonymity in 2001, warned that Venables could be killed if his identity was revealed. James Bulger's mother, Denise Fergus, said she was angry that the parole board did not tell her that Venables had been returned to prison and called for his anonymity to be removed if he was charged with a crime. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Justice stated that there was a worldwide injunction against publication of either killer's location or new identity. Jon Venables' return to prison revived a false claim that a man from Fleetwood, Lancashire was Jon Venables. While the claim was reported and dismissed in September 2005, it reappeared in March 2010 when it was circulated widely via SMS messages and Facebook. Chief Inspector Tracy O'Gara of Lancashire Constabulary stated, "An individual who was targeted 4.5 years ago was not Jon Venables, and now he has left the area." On 21st of June 2010, Jon Venables was charged with possession and distribution of indecent images of children. It was alleged that he had downloaded 57 indecent images of children over a 12-month period to February 2010 and had allowed other people to access the file through a peer-to-peer network. Venables faced 2 charges under the Protection of Children Act 1978. On 23rd of July, Venables appeared at a court hearing at the Old Bailey via video link, visible only to the judge hearing the case. He pleaded guilty to charges of downloading and distributing child pornography and was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. At the court hearing, it emerged that Venables had posed in online chat rooms as a 35-year-old Donnie Smith, a married woman from Liverpool, who boasted about abusing her 8-year-old daughter in the hope of obtaining further child pornography. Venables had contacted his probation officer in February 2010, fearing that his new identity had been compromised at his place of work. When the officer arrived at his flat, Venables was attempting to remove or destroy the hard drive of his computer with a knife and a tin opener. The officer's suspicions were aroused and the computer was taken away for examination, leading to the discovery of the child pornography, which included children as young as 2 years old being raped by adults and penetrative rape of 7 or 8-year-olds. The judge, Mr. Justice David Bean, ruled that Venables' new identity could not be revealed, but the media were allowed to report that he had been living in Cheshire at the time of his arrest. The High Court also heard that Venables had been arrested on suspicion of a fray in September 2008 following a drunken street fight with another man. Late that year, he was cautioned for possession of cocaine. In November 2010, a review of the National Probation Service handling of the case by David Omand found that probation officers could not have prevented Venables from downloading child pornography. Harry Fletcher, the Assistant General Secretary of the National Association of Probation Officers, said that only 24-hour surveillance would have stopped Venables. He was eligible for parole in July 2011. On 27th of June 2011, the parole board decided that he would remain in custody and that his parole would not be considered again for at least another year. On 4th of May 2011, it was reported that Venables would once again be given a new identity following what was described as a serious security breach, which revealed an identity that he had been using for his imprisonment in 2010. Details of the breach could not be reported for legal reasons. A spokesman for the Ministry of Justice said, "Such a change of identity is extremely rare and granted only when the police assess that there is clear and credible evidence of a sustained threat to the offender's life on release into the community." The incident occurred after a man from Exeter posted photographs on a website devoted to identifying pedophiles, allegedly showing Venables as an adult and revealing his name. In November 2011, it was reported that officials had decided that Venables would stay in prison for the foreseeable future as he would be likely to reveal his true identity if released. On 4th of July 2013, it was reported that the Parole Board for England and Wales had approved the release of Venables. On 3rd of September 2013, it was reported that Venables had been released from prison. On 23rd of November 2017, it was reported that he had again been recalled to prison for possession of child sexual abuse imagery. On 5th of January 2018, Venables was charged with unspecified offences relating to indecent images of children. On 7th of February, he pleaded guilty to possession of indecent images of children for a second time. He pleaded guilty via video link to 3 charges of making indecent images of children and 1 of possessing a pedophile manual that included advice for would-be child molesters, including instructions on child grooming and evading detection. He admitted being in possession of 392 Category A, 148 Category B, and 630 Category C child pornography images, and was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison. In September 2020, he was denied parole. On 4th of March 2019, James Bulger's father, Ralph, lost a legal challenge to lift the lifelong order protecting Venables' anonymity. Judge Andrew McFarlane turned down the request, saying that the uniquely notorious nature of the case meant There is a strong possibility, if not a probability, that if his identity were known, he would be pursued, resulting in grave and possibly fatal consequences. Like the world would be so upset. In late June 2019, it was reported that British officials considered resettling Jon Venables in Canada, Australia, or New Zealand due to the high costs behind protecting his anonymity. British authorities had allegedly spent £60,000 in legal fees to keep Jon Venables' identity a secret. In response to media coverage, then New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern remarked that Jon Venables would need an exemption under New Zealand's Immigration Act 2009 and that he should not bother applying. Now, the only reason why I decided to go through Jon's later life and offences is because I wanted to highlight just how hard the justice system and the police are working to conceal the identity of a killer and later turned pedophile, if he wasn't one already then. It's just unbelievable the amount of resources, the amount of money they spend to protect his identity, and that's a killer and a pedophile. Not to mention the judges who gave him all these insignificant sentences for these offences. So my question is the system working against the criminals or for the criminals? Because in my opinion, from what I've seen here, clearly they are not working for the victims. Even though Robert Thompson was believed to have been the leader of the James Bulger murder plot, he has never reoffended since he's been released. Not much is known about his current whereabouts, but it seems that he's apparently in a stable relationship with a man who is fully aware of his past. In 2011, the year James would have turned 21 years old, Denise Fergus launches the James Bulger Memorial Trust. For too long, Denise has seen nothing good come from James's death, so encouraged by Esther Ranson and the Red Balloon charity, she's inspired to help benefit and support young victims of crime, hatred or bullying. Her plans are to reward those who have shown exemplary conduct in helping others. She wants to do this by providing cost-free travel and holiday accommodation for children and families. She creates James Bulger House. Now, as recent as June 2022, thieves have targeted the grave of James Bulger. The little boy's heartbroken mom, Denise Fergus, revealed a sleeping stone cherub has vanished from her son's resting place. Her husband Stuart, James' stepfather, made a sickening discovery when he went to tend to the grave. Writing on Instagram, Denise said, "So this morning Stuart went and cleaned James's resting place and put down some new flowers. He has come back and told me that this sleeping statue has been taken. It's made of concrete and has a bit of weight to it, so it hasn't blown off anywhere." Posting a photo of the missing statue, she said, "This is the only picture we can find. It's a lot cleaner than this now. So please keep your eyes open." How low do some people have to be to actually take from a baby's grave? And that's just disgusting, honestly, completely horrendous. Just, let that baby rest in peace. He had a beautiful short life and a horrible, heart-wrenching death. At least give James some eternal peace. James is buried in the city's Kirkdale Cemetery. A parliamentary debate on whether a public inquiry should be held into James's murder is due to take place later this year. In June, Denise, now 54 years old, who has been calling for an inquiry, met Justice Secretary Dominic Raab, and days later it was announced a debate would take place. After the news was announced, Denise said, "My family and friends and I are over the moon. I've had 29 years of unanswered questions, and this is a truly historic, momentous step towards change. Finally, we are making progress towards an inquiry. There have been too many failings over the years, and I just hope this will be the beginning of something that will leave a legacy in the name of James. I've been fighting for justice for James since day one, so to have all this happen before the 30th anniversary means so much. And if this helps make it easier for other families going through the justice system, then I can say I've had part justice for James." Leon Fergus, James's brother, says it doesn't get any easier. James is still there for them. Tom Fergus, James's other brother, says it's heart-wrenching, especially knowing that he should have had an older brother. Michael Fergus, the other of the brothers, says that James has always been part of the family, and they even have a spare chair around the Christmas table for James, always empty. Their mom Denise likes seeing James there. Even though he's not there physically, they can still feel his presence. He will forever be loved. And this is the horrific story of 2-year-old James Bulger. It's truly horrific. The only thing that I will add on here is astounding efforts of the system to protect these murderers. Going as far as an international worldwide injunction is just mind-blowing to me. These kids were not sentenced as adults. These kids didn't spend time in an adult prison. These kids apparently went through rehabilitation. Yes, I understand that some kids go through rehabilitation and they turn out just fine, but I don't know, you guys. Am I being too cold towards this? But I really think that murderers who are children shouldn't be given special treatment, especially these two. On 12th of February 1993, they had a plan in mind. This was premeditated murder of a baby. They knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they knew exactly that this was wrong. Otherwise, they wouldn't lie about being at the Strand that day. They tried to manipulate the police, they tried to work the police, and they ended up blaming each other. If this doesn't tell you anything about these children, then I don't know what will. I don't see why they should be given an opportunity to live a normal life and be happy just like everybody else when they took that same opportunity away from baby James. And quite frankly, I don't care about their PTSD or flashbacks or nightmares or being heartbroken. I don't think they should have that right to try and gain sympathy. Also, as much as psychiatrists or psychologists are trying to say that they have been bullied, came from broken families, the environment, blah, 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 so are so many other kids. They had a hard life growing up, they've been bullied, their family is broken, and they don't turn out to be murderers. If you've paid attention to everything that I mentioned in this video, in this series, Jon Venables turned into a pedophile. Not only did he turn into one, but it's not in the public interest to know who he is. For all we know, he could be my neighbor, he could be your neighbor, your child's boyfriend, the cashier at the store, he could be anyone. And he's not only protected, but he's also being given all these light sentences for horrendous crimes. And what is that teaching him and others who might follow? That it's perfectly fine to do this because you get off lightly, right? He even knows how to conceal things. How do you think he knows that? His identity is hidden. He's an adult now. He knows how he works. It's just mind-blowing to me, all of it. I personally will never be able to look at children the same way again. And I'm asking myself one last question. When will we start treating children as adults on the serious crimes that they committed? Not rehabilitation, because generally that doesn't really teach you a lesson, not juvenile detention centers, but proper adult prisons with life sentences. The punishment should fit the crime, regardless of the age of the offender. You kill someone, you must pay for it at the full extent of the law. But it seems that in most cases, this fails more and more. Thank you guys so much for staying with me. Please let me know what do you think in the comment section down below. For now, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!